What next? Transcript from the novel A Life Singular. Down in the courtroom below, Judge Milne drew the proceedings to a rather unceremonious close, with only 3 officials and the legal teams remaining. As soon as the gavel had fallen, signaling the show's final snap of the clapboard, the performers' disposition switched from somber to festive. With the weekend upon them and the high-profile trial concluded just in time. Defense counsel tugged his Mr. Floaty outfit over his head and became an ordinary man again, much to Kearney's disappointment. He looked up to where he knew his old school pal had been sitting all week. Jerry leaned over the balcony wall. "Stephen Greenshaw, I presume?" he shouted to the erstwhile Mr. Floaty. "How are you? It's been a while." "Indeed, Blakey, me old mate," replied the barrister. "I knew you were wrapped up in the diamond world, but didn't realize you'd be here. Are you going to join us for a drink or two?" The former head boy glanced over towards Jeff and his daughter, who were also on their feet, having been descended upon by overjoyed and curious fans. At this moment, too, the doors at the rear of the public gallery flung open and a swarm of additional media personnel streamed in and down the stairs. Greenshaw would have to wait. The celebrity's manager realized, turning on his heels and running up the steps 2 at a time. He held his hands up to stop the marauding crowd from coming any closer. "Give them some privacy, please," the courteous businessman instructed the journalists and photographers, allowing himself latitude to modify his tenor as experience suggested would be required. "They need some time to come to terms with the verdict and what happens next." The reporters were desperate for a comment, of course. Jerry refused to be drawn, causing a few to try shouting in the Diamond's direction. Seeing his faithful offsider under siege, the rock star apologized to the group of fans that had surrounded him and dragged his heavy legs up the stairs toward the press gang. He would have to face them sooner or later, so he might as well get it over with. Kearney followed out of the same duty, secretly hoping not to be asked any intrusive questions. "Mr. Diamond, can you give us your views on the trial?" one man from the Australian broadsheet asked. "It's over," Jeff gave a perfunctory answer. "That's all I care about right now." "Are you happy with the sentence of life in prison?" shouted a woman from ABC. "Happy's not the word I'd use, but I'm pleased the jury reached a conclusive verdict," he told the array of wavering microphones. "Miss Diamond?" another reporter called out. The tall, handsome man invited his daughter to stand next to him, resting a protective hand on her shoulder. Cameras flashed all around them, which was nothing new. Jerry stood back and let his clients do what they did best, turning round after a while and returning to the edge of the balcony. "Are you pleased with the guilty verdict?" the teenager was asked. "Yes, thank you," she replied. "It's been a tiring week and I don't know what else to say. I'm sorry." "That's fine, gorgeous," her father encouraged. "We're all tired. We'll organize a formal press conference in a few days' time. For now, we just want to get out of this place, if you don't mind." Vince Allen, one of the best-known journalists in Australia's entertainment industry, thrust his voice recorder towards the famous star. The two had grown into regular sparring partners over the years, since the African famine relief campaigns in the mid-1980s. "So, Jeff, how do you feel about Garcia, knowing your father also served a life sentence?" The great man shook his head. "Vince, I'm not prepared to talk about that now. Of course I appreciate the irony of life's circular coincidences. Garcia probably doesn't deserve to go down for murder, but then Lynn didn't deserve to be murdered either. Justice has been done, of sorts. It's not fair, but I can live with that. I'm as content as I can be with the outcome." The honest confession temporarily stunned the throng, captured on tape for broadcast around the world. As the widower forged a path to the top of the gallery steps, his gaze alighted on Wendy Garcia lurking near the exit, also surrounded by a number of opportunistic reporters. He broke away and strode across to where she stood, and to everyone's astonishment, they embraced. Cameras again whirred and clicked in furious fashion as a perfect front-page news story evolved right in front of their lenses. Kearney was shocked by a surge of furious disappointment. Opting not to follow her father's example, she held no compassion for her mother's killer or his estranged spouse. Perhaps if she had been the direct descendant of a double murderer, she might have thought differently. She wasn't, fortunately, for her bewildered young conscience. "How are you going?" The superstar asked the woman in red jacket. "How are you going, more like?" Wendy answered with an awkward, grating western suburbs accent. "I'm really sorry. Lynn passed away." "Thanks. So am I." The tall, dark-haired billionaire nodded with a sigh. "So am I. And I'm sorry that my bloody excuse for an husband killed her. I never thought he'd do it. Didn't think he'd had the balls." Jeff shrugged, absorbing the painful irony. "No? I guess people can always surprise each other. You probably poured a little oil onto the fire from time to time, didn't you?" Wendy was taken aback, unable to think of a response. By now, Jerry had arrived at his friend's side, marveling at yet another priceless media moment being architect on the flyby, the genius communicator, and his new puppet. "We all do things that piss off our partners," the widower smiled, a tear or two escaping down one side of his face. "I know I did. Lynn's endless patience was rewarded with eternal peace. You wanted someone like me, but you married someone like him, and you made him pay for it. I pushed my luck and married someone like Lynn, and we both paid for it." The grieving husband took a deep breath, determined to control his anger in front of Kearney and the press. To his delight, he received a small token of appreciation for his trouble, feeling his tattoo sting sweetly in response to his candor. All that remained was to deliver a parting shot on behalf of his beautiful best friend. "Now you've chosen to live the rest of your life as Juan Antonio Garcia's ex-wife. So we're both left to find our way through what happened. Let's just get on with it and not drag each other through the mud any longer, okay? Juan Antonio will be all right, and you will too. I wish I could say the same. Good luck, Wendy." The plain woman stood dumbfounded as the superstar shook her hand. He then stepped to one side, as statuesque and dignified as ever, inviting his daughter and Jerry to walk up the steps and out of the public space ahead of him. Wonderful Wendy had been left summarily to the lions of the waiting media rabble, much to the astonishment of everyone present. "Papa, that was amazing!" the astounded teenager exclaimed once they were back in the third-floor corridor. "She had no clue what to say." Jeff gave the youngster a bear hug. "Gracias. That was the plan. Let's get out of here, Pequeñita. I'm just hanging on here." "Hold your horses, mate. We've been summoned to the judge's chambers for a drink," their manager interrupted, "via Mr. Floaty." "Have we? Is that appropriate?" Kearney asked. "Yeah, it's appropriate," her father nodded with a deep sigh, "because the case is all signed off now. There's nothing I'd rather do less, but I suppose we shouldn't snub them after they worked their magic on Mama's behalf." His friend slapped the stalwart on the back. "Good man. Let's get a beer into you." Shell-shocked and exhausted, the trio shared the lift with 4 other people who were none the wiser as to the trial's outcome. Jeff and Jerry provided polite answers to their questions, succeeding in giving no salient information away. Upon reaching the first floor, where the law firm's offices were located, they found Stephen Greenshaw waiting for them by the lifts. He extended a bony hand to his schoolmate and then towards the man with whom everyone wanted to be seen, yet who had no desire to see anyone. "This is our daughter, Kearney," the celebrity ceded, nudging the young woman forward while raising his right arm to her shoulder, instead of shaking the lawyer's hand. He was tired of watching the graceful teenager being left until last during introductions. Such disregard for common courtesy would never have been tolerated around Lynn. Therefore, it was high time it no longer happened to their gypsy girl either. "Pleased to meet you, Kearney," the barrister responded, taking her hand instead. "Thank you," the father spoke on the youngster's behalf, finally extending his own hand. "Good on you, Stephen. Nice to meet you." "Likewise, Jeff," the tall, lean gentleman replied. "Please accept my condolences for the loss of your wife, and for your mother, Kearney." Formalities over, Greenshaw directed the visitors down a narrow corridor. The chambers were almost deserted, being after 6 o'clock on a Friday evening, when legal eagles had much better things to do with their weekends than to hang around their place of work. The familiar voice of Graham Winton could be heard through an open door towards the end of the right-hand side. He sounded full of the joys of spring, no doubt regaling tales of glorious victory. "We'll stay for half an hour, max. Jeff told the teenager in a hushed voice. "I promise." She grinned in assent. "Are we going home tonight or tomorrow?" "Tonight, if possible. Is that okay?" Kearney responded with a childish nod, anxious not to be a burden on her exhausted papa, who wagged his finger, scolding her for making him cry yet again. Jerry went ahead of the Diamonds into the enormous and opulently furnished rooms. Inside were Judge Milne, the entire prosecution team, and 4 other people whom he recognized as the rest of the defense counsel. The judge resembled a normal businesswoman, now minus her black gown and wearing a floral blouse and a light gray skirt. Not at all like someone who had sentenced a man to life imprisonment less than an hour ago. Rosemary Milne stepped forward to greet the new arrivals and introduced herself, again being presented with Kearney first. "Thank you," the 17-year-old said with a broad smile, drawn out of habit from her deepest reserves. "Do I call you Your Honor?" The kind woman chuckled. "No, you can call me Rose. It's lovely to meet you, Kearney. And Jeff. Do you mind if I call you Jeff?" "No, absolutely not," the diplomat answered. "Thanks for the invitation down here, Rose. It's kind of you to include us. And this is my business manager and longtime friend, Jerry Blake. As a matter of fact, he went to school with counsel for the defense." "Oh, sure, is that right?" their host replied, loud enough for the cohort to hear. "Are there any embarrassing stories to be told?" The suave executive took the judge's hand, all smiles. "Good evening, Rose. I'm afraid not. I was too young to be let in on any of Greenshaw's secrets, so I'm going to disappoint you. His sister, on the other hand..." Jeff shook his hand and sniffed. "Doesn't take him long to debase the conversation." "Well," Rose let out a sunny laugh. "Welcome anyway, all of you. I'm glad you felt you could accept our invitation. It must have been a very difficult week for you. First, though, let me pass on my personal condolences. Your wife was such a wonderful person." The celebrity nodded. "It has, and she was. Both still are, I assure you. We're very pleased it's over before the weekend, so thanks for wrapping things up so fast." The attentive Irishman presented his clients with heavy crystal glasses, one containing beer and the other filled with orange juice and a number of bobbing ice cubes. In front of the judge, the playful father reached for the juice, causing titters of amusement, and it was Kearney's frustrated head which was left shaking this time. Winton sidled up and rested a hand on the famous shoulder. "So, sir, here we are. We got him," he claimed in triumph. "You did. Congratulations, Graham. And commiserations, I guess, Stephen." The former counsel for the defense raised his glass. "Cheers," he shouted from a few meters away, where he and Jerry had commenced their body reacquaintances. "Commiserations for having drawn the short straw, you mean? Defending the man who shot Lynn Diamond? It's not a case I would have taken voluntarily, I have to admit." Jeff's jaw muscles tightened as anger brewed inside at the metaphorical distance the cocky barrister had put between him and his beautiful best friend. Rose Milne sensed his guest's negative reaction and changed the subject, addressing the quiet teenager once more. "Is this the first court session you've attended, Kearney?" "Yes, it is. It was extremely interesting. Thank you for providing the jury with so much information about the process. It helped me understand what was going on, too." "Oh, you're welcome, my dear," Rose replied. "It's important for people to be clear on why we follow all the various rules. I'm sure half of it must seem completely pointless to the average person. When I found out I was presiding over this trial, I made a mental note to be extra careful in explaining the technicalities. I wanted to get the right verdict." "The right verdict?" the victim's husband challenged. "Why this case more than any other?" The perceptive law professional nodded. "I'm sure you understand, Jeff, the reality of being seen to get a high-profile case right. Of course, we always try to arrive at the right verdict in every case, but in a situation where the Crown's prosecuting on behalf of a public that's so angry and upset by what happened to your late wife and your late mother, Kearney, it's doubly important to be as thorough as possible." "Excuse me, Rose, but do you mind not using the word late, please?" the brave student asked. I'd rather still think of my mother as my mother. The group of lawyers fell silent for a few seconds, taking in this heartfelt request. The only minor in the room had managed to give those with many years of professional training and experience a simple reality check. And to congratulate her, her father did nothing whatsoever. His daughter was coming of age rapidly. "I'm very sorry," Rose responded, putting her hand out to touch Kearney's arm. "I understand. We have a habit of getting lost in the detail of a case and forgetting the impact on the people it affects." To restore some lightness to the atmosphere, the two Sydney Grammar Old Boys struck up a conversation about which schools various prominent New South Wales and national personalities had attended. While the attention was on the others, Jeff gave his daughter an approving wink for sticking up for herself and her family, and she followed his eyes to the younger solicitors who had broken away into a separate clique at the far end of the office. The teenager took the cue and excused herself to join Peter and Moira, who were eager to include the pretty, dark-haired singer-songwriter. They introduced her to their colleagues, much to the doting dad's pleasure as he watched her mingling with the 20-somethings. "Tell me, Jeff," Graham Winton asked in a voice rendered even lustier by alcohol, "what was your reaction when the foreman pronounced the G word?" The widower sighed. "Geez, every emotion at once, pretty much," he answered. And then, very soon afterwards, "Nothing at all." "Nothing?" Stephen repeated, eyes wide with disbelief. "I'd have thought you'd be cheering. I was, and I was representing the godforsaken pleb." A sardonic chuckle slipped from the splendid philanthropist's lips, while Rose and Jerry stood back to witness the two senior barristers take the celebrities' comments as criticism of their respective performances. "Actually, no," Jeff continued. "As I said to you several times, Graham, I just wanted to see the trial fought fairly. Guilty or not guilty makes no difference to me, but guilty's the right outcome for Lynn, for our kids, and for Lynn's family. So in the respect, it's good to have heard the G word." The Star's manager piped up. "Well, for me anyway, I'm exceedingly pleased to have heard all three G words, and I'm sure you will be too. Mate, once the shock wears off, one thing you need to know about Jeff Diamond, ladies and gentlemen, is that even after 25 years as one of Australia's richest and most influential personalities, he still considers himself a man of the people." Rose smiled. "We're all people of the people, Jerry, or we ought to be at any rate. It's an important quality, and I admire it. Why else would I have had so much trouble controlling the public gallery this week? I don't preside over many trials where the phrase, 'I love you,' is yelled out on a regular basis." Everyone laughed, including the humble megastar. Former Minister Floaty remained indignant, however, keen for further sporting banter. "But with these low-life murderers, we educated members of societies need to take the moral high ground," the haughty solicitor insisted. "Even you'd have to agree with that, Jeff." "Look, I'm not sure I do, counsels," the 43-year-old answered, raising his cut crystal beer glass to the others. "I grew up in Garcia's low-life world, despite having played in yours for a good while now. I know what it's like to be treated like a second-class citizen, a pleb, as you called our insipid little defendant just now. As I said to the jurors upstairs, Lynn didn't deserve to die, and maybe Garcia doesn't deserve to spend the rest of his life in prison. Fundamentally, though, Stephen, I do agree with you." Greenshaw's expression switched from derision to approval, with a hint of arrogance thrown in for good measure. Jeff braced himself to clarify his position to the audience who had taken him hostage at the end of an arduous week. He loosened his tie and undid the top button of his shirt, preparing to turn the tables on these righteous and self-appointed custodians of the law. Even though the entertainment industry's biggest draw card cut a much less strident shadow these days, he couldn't help noticing the judge's eyes scan him up and down in admiration. He still exuded the necessary magnetism to win over any crowd, needing only to trot out one more hackneyed spiel today before he would free to rescue his gorgeous daughter and whisk her back home to the seclusion of their city penthouse. "I believe people have to be educated to be able to use power to their advantage. he nodded. So, in that sense, I do agree. And for this reason, I'm comfortable with the power resting with people like you guys. Only up to a point, though. I don't doubt the Silver Spoon Brigade works very hard, both as students to make the most of their golden opportunities and later while building careers. For Christ's sake, Lynn was one of you, and Kearney over there is one too. I can see the good and the bad in growing up on either side of the fence. So you don't consider yourself educated? Rose asked in surprise. Yeah, of course I do, the celebrity smiled. But being willing to learn and being given the opportunity to become educated don't always go hand in hand. I got myself educated in spite of the uninspiring circumstances of my birth. I've turned myself into one of you. Well, almost. But I'm determined to keep a foot in both camps. The skilled negotiator focused on one of his feet and then the other, spreading them further apart to illustrate his point. As he spoke, he scraped the sole of his right shoe along the floor towards his left, making a point of tapping the two together to draw attention to the gleaming black leather percussion instruments. He felt all eyes burning into his head as it bowed to the traditional worsted carpet. Lifting his chin again, Jeff stared directly into their worldly but overprivileged faces and carried on. If I don't, the haves will drift off in their self-indulgent ship of plenty and leave the have-nots behind for good. Ignorance is the biggest problem, not a lack of intelligence. People in both camps are intelligent, but they don't necessarily know they are. That's ignorance, no matter what other excuses we might make. Garcia, as you rightly pointed out, Rose, had no idea about the counseling services available from DCF charities that could have helped him. Instead, he shot my wife. That's ignorance too. But his biggest handicap was not his fault. And the fact we hadn't got our message out to him makes it partially my fault, which eats me up inside, for Christ's sake. It's all our faults for not keeping the two camps close enough together. Those of us who understand this ought to do something about it, rather than hanging our hats on G-words. 'Cause by the time we get to guilty, there's already a victim. The tall, good-looking Enigma stopped himself from taking a much-needed breath in an effort to reinforce the gravitas of his closing sentence. Judge and sparring barristers inhaled for him, appearing stunned and crestfallen. In the bereaved philanthropist's eyes, true justice had not been served today, even though tomorrow's newspapers would dole out wholehearted praise to the system which saw Lynn Dyson Diamond's killers safe behind bars for at least 2 decades. Jeff took a gulp from his beer glass, waiting for someone to contradict him. It was high time to leave the New South Wales legal fraternity among the expensive taxpayer-funded office furnishings and return to a place where he didn't have to constantly defend his own sensibilities. No longer possessing appetite or motive to woo these East Side snobs with his magic words like some upmarket freak show. But hey, the wise peacemaker closed, I'm just an ungrateful bastard who should shut up and let you get on with your weekends. Who knows? On another day, the results may have been different. Those who needed a guilty verdict got lucky today. Amen to that, Jerry chanted, toasting his friend with an empty tumbler. The widower sighed. And perversely, Garcia may be a whole lot happier in prison since the pressure will finally be off. He won't have to struggle every day and won't always be made to feel inadequate by his wife, his boss, and the rest of us, who can't help but look down on people like him. Having lost his freedom in the physical world, he's somehow freer spiritually, emotionally. Ironic, isn't it? Yes, it is. A very interesting way of looking at things, Rose Milne replied, pausing for one of her minions to refill her gin and tonic. There certainly are plenty of documented cases where offenders use the prison system as a way of escaping the responsibilities of life. Absolutely. The son of one such offender agreed. That's exactly what I mean. If anything, the G word gave him everything he was looking for. License to hand his list of seemingly impossible challenges to someone else and say, okay, I give up. You tell me how I should do this. And you did. Winton Greenshaw and Blake The three successful private schoolboys stared vacantly at each other in tacit acknowledgement of a superior mind. Graham held out his hand to the celebrity, who shook it reluctantly, appreciating the gesture's magnanimity. "You've taught me a lot, sir," the barrister said, turning to his legal colleagues. "We all had dinner the night before last for the team to get some background for our closing arguments, and I have to admit to my eyes being opened considerably. I used the term everyman philosophy, I believe, Jeff, didn't I?" "Yep, I remember that," the intelligent man answered with a chuckle. "It's very apt, though I say so myself," the prosecutor went on, drawing in his learned colleagues, "because we all spend our days with our heads buried in the textbooks, talking about interpretation of the law and legal precedents, all very theoretical and frightfully intelligent. Then you go and say something like, 'Okay, I give up. Tell me how I should do it.' And everything makes perfect sense." Tired of regurgitating details about the trial, Jeff smiled through gritted teeth, glancing over to his daughter to see if she was ready to leave. He would have taken Winton's comments as a compliment if they hadn't come across as patronizing. "Thanks, Graham, I think. We better make our move." "Geez, did you want to fly back tonight, too?" The Star's business manager read this gentle hint and set his replenished beer glass down onto the table. Old school friends were a hoot to catch up with, but his loyalties lay with diamonds, especially tonight. "Yes, mate. Great idea. I'll walk out with you," Winton suggested, reaching for a stout, bulging briefcase and his suit jacket. "Stephen, are you coming?" "Rosemary, thanks again for good counsel this week and for a job very well done. Next week is another day." The two barristers each kissed their superior colleague on the cheek and waved to their associates, who had also taken their cue to depart. Rose Milne shook the handsome celebrity's hand once more, and he thanked her more formally. With Kearney soon at her father's side, they all left the judge alone in her chambers. "We should have offered to wash the glasses," the teenager chided, feigning innocence and swinging her dad's arm like a child. "Shh!" Jeff scolded. "Now that wasn't very nice, was it?" Their relief at being out of the stuffy corridors behind the courtrooms was short-lived. Lunging at the doors and stepping out into the main foyer of the Supreme Court building, the Diamonds and their companions were confronted by 40 or 50 journalists and camera operators who surged forwards en masse on the first glimpse of their target. "Hello! Here we go again," Jerry bellowed to the startled lawyers. "Just stand back and let him deal with it. That's what I do anyway." The seasoned crowd-pleaser scowled at his friend in jest. "Cheers, mate. I thought you'd at least carry my gun." Kearney watched the two straight-laced gentlemen grappling with this last throwaway line, cringing at her father's wicked sense of humor and wondering what these fine, upstanding society figures might make of it. The reporters fired question after question at the widower, all of which he answered in a straightforward way while supplying as little information as he could get away with. Greenshaw and Winton stood in awe as Jeff courted the cameras and monopolized the microphones that surrounded him, thankful it was neither of their turns to be interviewed. The frenetic scene looked like the witness stand on steroids to them, a welcome diversion at the end of a long week. "He's never made it easy on himself," the billionaire's long-time manager explained, only half joking. "When Shakespeare came up with the phrase, 'pound of flesh,' I swear he was thinking of this particular Polish Jew." Prosecuting counsel laughed out loud. "The greats are greats for good reason, I'm coming to believe. I said it before, and I say it again now. It's not just hype, is it? Those who depend on the hype get found out sooner or later, but people like Jeff Diamond endure and go from strength to strength. True greats stand the test of time."